Jeff?
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. I appreciate your introduction, and I want to welcome everyone. It's good morning to everyone here on the East Coast of America, and good afternoon to those of you that are in Europe, and probably good evening and to those that are in other parts of the world. So welcome to everyone to this month's Institute of Coaching webinar. I am particularly excited about this session with everyone today because this is a topic that we have been talking about at the Institute for a long time, and we were waiting to find the ideal presenter, the coach with the right background to share with us techniques, themes, and cases around leaders in transition from a global perspective. So we are very honored today to have Dr. Katrina Burrus in the house, coming to us from Switzerland. And I want to take a minute and introduce Katrina, and then we will turn it over to her. And we have a very interesting, and she's very excited about also doing some interaction with our participants. So as Stephanie said, you'll have two ways, hopefully, to interact with us today. One is to send questions through the chat box, and also at appropriate times with Katrina, she'll talk directly to folks who have specific questions and case studies. So Dr. Katrina Burrus is a global coach. She's based in Switzerland, but she does work all over the world. She's been coaching folks for over 20 years in the leadership space, and she is the first master certified coach from the ICF, the International Coach Federation in Switzerland. She's also a founding board member of the ICF Switzerland. She serves as an adjunct professor to several universities and speaks around the world on topics of global nomadic leadership and also difficult, abrasive, and brilliant leaders. She is also a multimedia maven coming to us from Switzerland. She has her own podcast that she does regularly around global nomadic leadership and interviews executive coaches on a variety of different topics from around the world. And she also, I believe, has her own television show where she interviews senior executives, folks that she has coached, and also does case studies with other executive coaches. So I am thrilled to have Katrina with us today. She's a good friend, a fellow of the Institute of Coaching, and she really has a unique perspective on leadership coaching with folks that are in transition from multiple cultural backgrounds, that are moving through global corporations, family businesses. She works in many cases with people that are from one country but work in another country or have moved around the world. And it's a particularly interesting topic for those of us that are working more and more with global teams. I'm finding even in my practice that even though a company may be based in California or based in Massachusetts or based in Brazil, that often they'll have team members these days that are positioned all over the world. And so more and more of our coaching has a multicultural, multi-geographical component to it. And as our clients find themselves traveling, moving, migrating, and having to deal with the complexities of managing in a multicultural, cross-global world, it's really important for us as coaches to have not only knowledge, but also specific techniques and expertise in helping them to be successful in those roles. So we're thrilled to have Katrina with us, and with that, I want to say hello and welcome her to the stage. Hi, Katrina.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I'm so excited about talking with other fellow coaches. And thank you, Stephanie, as well. So we're going to be talking about expatriates and global leaders in transition. Thank you, Jeff. I love social media, and it's true. I do have podcasts on executive coaching and on leadership, as well as a TV show. So anyone that's writing a book and that is interested in being interviewed, don't hesitate to contact me, and we'll see what we can do. So today, what I would like to overview, if we have time, is one on 4 case studies: expatriation, promotions, family-owned business, and repatriation. And I'll be asking you questions of why coaching is important for these transitions and coaching approaches. So, why should one coach expatriates? After all, if you are going to coach expatriates, what is the information that you can share with, as an executive coach with the companies? Well, 40% fail within the first 18 months of their transitions. That's a huge amount. And a transition failure costs more than 10 times these expensive salaries. So it costs the company a tremendous amount of revenue, disappointments, also people that are going to become cynical because the boss has not succeeded. There's a lot besides just the financial if a senior leader fails. And why do many talented and very bright leaders fail miserably when sent to overseas assignments? Well, what is done today is, one, line management's decision to send a leader abroad is often based on technical competence or performance in home country. It's not enough. That is one of the causes of this high level of failure rate in the transition. A critical component is overlooked. That's leaders and their cultural identity. Where do they call home? Where is their culture? And we'll look at this a little more closely. I'm going to do the first case study, which is you need to advise the boss and convince him that coaching will help the expatriates transition. Okay? So you need to advise him, which is not always coaching, but often you start by that way, and then have the arguments to tell him that expatriate coaching is important for the business and for the leader. So here's the case study. The first attempt to develop an Asian market was a huge failure because they sent somebody, Lee, the local Singaporean CEO. He was a disaster because here you're selling prestigious Swiss watches. This company has 10,000 people and 15 offices worldwide. They had a local person do it that went through his network and distributed these prestigious high-end watches through a low-end distribution network. And so the branding was destroyed to some degree. And the local Singaporean had no understanding of the prestigious Swiss watch culture. Now, the fellow, your client, the boss, needs to select an expatriate. It's either Pedro or it's Juan. And either one should go to Singapore. If the boss makes a second selection mistake, his career will be at stake because the boss, he's responsible for all Asia. And he asks you for your help. The Asian market is of strategic importance. Both expatriates that will be sent abroad are potential future CEOs of the Zahler company in the next 5 years. So there's an element of expatriating, also that they experience international experience so that they can come back and be a global leader of this multinational company. So here are the two candidates. First, we have Pedro. He has Mexican parents, grew up in a military compound in Mexico with his father. He met his Chinese wife at the university. 4 years of foreign assignments in New York, Paris, and Buenos Aires. So he has international experience. He has 10 years with the Zahler watch company, mostly at headquarters. He's head of branding. He has an outstanding expertise. I mean, he's known worldwide for being a top brand specialist. He's motivated to acquire more international assignments, plus he'll get more money, and it's a job progress, of course. So that is Pedro. Now we'll go to Juan. Juan has a Chinese mother, Indian father, lives in Mexico City, studied in the US. He now works at headquarters. He's had 6 years with Ziller, 2 years in Japan, 2 years in Canada, and 2 years at headquarters. He has good expertise in watches, he's a good networker, but nothing like Pedro in branding. He wants international assignment, more because he's bored at headquarters and wants new challenges. So, to yourself, who would you choose for an expatriation to Singapore? Before you make your final list, just note down who you would choose and why, and then I'll give you some more information. I want to talk to you about these global nomadic leaders. They're global because they deal in global business and they travel all over the world. They're nomadic because they're highly mobile and they move every 2 years about for their companies. And not only that, a lot of them have been highly mobile while they grew up, like sons of diplomats, sons of the military, or missionaries that have constantly moved from one place to another, and it's part of their DNA to some degree. And they're leaders because they're in a situation of authority. Now, so these profiles, their qualities, they're raised with multiple cultures, they speak multiple languages, and they're used to be dealing with diversity, okay? They're mobile, they love variety and change. Some of these global nomads never want to travel again in their life, but I'm talking about those that do. I'm talking about these global nomads in corporations that do travel all over the world for the companies. And they have an innate ability to deal with complex, multicultural, ambiguous situation. So these James Bonds of culture, what are their vulnerabilities? Well, they have a sense of loneliness because on one hand they're at home everywhere but feel like they belong nowhere. And they have a lot of unresolved grief because they've moved so many times and said so many times goodbye to people. And so relationships sometimes, they have intimacy problems. They're already on their next move, so sometimes they don't commit as well. They feel rootless, especially when they're destabilized, and they can get bored easily. They zap. If they don't like a situation or something's painful, they do what they know best, they change. So these are the vulnerabilities of these global nomadic leaders. And I just want to highlight what makes them highly mobile and so good at it. What is constant in their constantly changing environment? You might say the sand, the weather, the desert. But in fact, there's something that's constant. We all need something that is constant, even when we're in change. And in physics as well, we can see if there's too much change and there's not something constant, we break down to smaller and more insignificant pieces. So here, what's constant is the camel. It's the tent. It's the animals that accompany them. It's the people that accompany them. So these people become crucial to give them some sense of stability. So let's apply this to the corporation. And I'll give you some examples of my clients. One of my clients was the rising star of a company. He was doing extremely well and very enthusiastic. He was traveling the world, and his girlfriend was always following him around for 15 years. But he never married her because in some ways he had intimacy issues. One day she said, "It's enough, I'm leaving you." And he literally fell to pieces. She had been his constant in a constantly changing environment. His reaction was, he changed apartments several times. He all of a sudden wanted to leave his company. He wanted to become an artist, and yet he was a rising star of the company. So he puts everything in question. And here it's important as coaches to determine what is a change that he really wants, or is it a reaction to something? And so his anchor was torn out from under his feet. The same thing can happen with missionaries that go all over the world. You know, they put their life at stake to help people. And that's the next picture. But what is their constant in the constantly changing environment? It's the mission. They believe in the mission and can do incredible things because they have this belief system. And so if they come back, or the Red Cross or the international organization disappoints them in some ways in their values, again, everything is put into question and they feel completely destabilized. Yes, many people, you can say, are destabilized, but they're even more and in a loss. Especially surprising since they seem so highly mobile. Another example is the chalet. This fellow left from one country to another every 2 years with his family. And I said, well, you're going to leave again, but what is constant in your life? And he says, I have a chalet in the Swiss Alps. I said, chalet in the Swiss Alps? And he's traveling all over the world. I said, well, how long do you stay in your Swiss chalet? Oh, only 2 weeks. I said, and I thought to myself, and that's your anchor? He says, well, you know, when I go back to the chalet, everything's the same. That's where we put our suitcases down, where the children see the same thing every year. So that became. Then the bed. The bed was somebody that kept insisting that he goes around the world with his bed. And the poor HR people said, please, buy yourself a new bed in the new country. It's much cheaper. He says, no. I want my bed. So they had to schlep it around the world, his bed. He had to sleep in that same bed no matter where he was. And finally, the last picture is of the people around the world. Is a client of mine that he did something silly, and there was question about firing him at one point. And he, who also traveled 35 years around the world for his company, started to fall to pieces. He called me up and he says, look, I don't know what's happening to me. I speak every year at the annual meeting for my company because I'm a very good orator. But now I stutter and I can't seem to find my sentences. And people are telling me that I act weird. And I also have eczema all over my body. What was his anchor that had been destabilized? It's the company. And he even said, the company is my family. And so that was the constant in this constantly changing environment. So as coaches, these highly mobile leaders, we need to find what gives them a sense of stability. So, and again, let's look at what environment overall we've had in the last 30, 50 years. What global changes are impacting our global leaders? And we can see that in 1970 to 1990, we saw a huge amount of Americans that were trying to develop after the war, their business, their multinationals, and most of them went from the States to Europe and a bit to Asia. Well, look at it today. This is the world we're living. I came back from speaking in India, and their top leaders, all they want is international experience. Of course, they become highly desirable. So then I asked the chairman of Nestle and the chairman of Technical, what are they looking for in their global leaders? So Peter Brabeck, who is the chairman of Nestle, he said, frankly speaking, I cannot imagine a top manager at Nestle who has not lived in several countries and who does not speak at least 2 or 3 languages. This is a basic requirement. And I asked him, well, why? And he says, look, we have an international brand that is the same, but every country, in every country, the food is adapted to the taste and to the local customs. If our global leader does not understand the local customs, how can he be a global leader? So that was his point of view. He also said, look, when I go and visit people around the world, I look at the map of the world. And if a country's missing, it really gives me an insight how they see the world. Then I interviewed Nico, and he said, my European general manager was born in India, grew up in Saudi Arabia, was educated in the US, and is now responsible for the European market. So again, I asked him, why such a profile? He says, look, we want in Europe especially diversity. We don't want a US bias in one way of thinking. Moreover, we want buy-in from the non-US constituencies. And plus, we don't want the feeling that people around the world have a top-down perception that everything comes from the US. And there's only one way of saying things. We want geographical diversity. And Europe there's no huge country like the States. There's full of smaller countries, each with their language, their legal system, their political system. So there's no economy of scales. And so we need a leader that can adapt to these different countries and understand how to deal with them. So diversity is definitely important. And if they're not diverse, that they have that international experience. So finally, what did the boss choose after your suggestion? He finally thought, who is the better candidate? Maybe I'll open up here and say, who do you think is the better candidate to go to Singapore and get back the prestige branding of the Swiss watch company? Can we have a few answers? The good thing is both answers. Yes?
I'm looking to see if anyone is raising their hand, and I don't see any up quite yet. We might have a shy audience today. Let's give it another minute.
I do have a comment from John Reed. John, if you want to speak, raise your hand, but I'll read your comment. He's saying, based on his experience with a similar situation, he would be wary about the first candidate. Katrina, I'm forgetting the name of the first candidate, Pedro, that he might not have the ability to focus on relationships and trust, which would take patience, as he would be very aggressive in driving the business agenda.
Yes, very good remark. Excellent remark. So good. We'll go on and see. Absolutely, that's a very good remark. And then our second case study, we'll see how that pans out. Thank you for your comment. Awesome. So let's go. This is what they did to recommend. Pedro, we'll go to yes?
I had one more. I did have somebody with their hand. Maybe we can just hear what he had to say. Mahesh, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'm Mahesh from Sri Lanka. I would go for candidate number 2 because his networking skills are good. So in a new country, he'll be able to establish relationships and build trust faster than the first person.
Absolutely. Very good remark. And I'll tell you why they chose Pedro. Because the branding was Swiss watch companies and that's what they wanted to promote. They chose Pedro because he's a brand specialist and he can harmonize the processes, promotes the value of the company, the head company, and assure that the branding is respected. That was their priority, and they didn't want the watches to be changed, like the one with the food. The food they adapt. Okay, so in this case, they wanted the Swiss branding to stand out. So that's why they chose Pedro, and for other reasons which we'll look for later. Then Juan, he is indeed much more international. He's a global nomad. He will go up to set offices in California, USA, and communicate to headquarters which watches would work best in the US. Why did they choose Juan? It's because Juan, he's not American, he's not Mexican, he's not anyone. And he's multicultural. And let's give an example. He's bilingual or trilingual. When you're bilingual, trilingual, not only do you talk in that language, you think in that language, and you start behaving like people in that language. Okay, maybe it's reductive, but let's say I'm making a point. And then, so for him, he's the perfect candidate to adapt the product and the watches, because they're ready to do that in the States, and communicate with HR, like he does between his languages, between his different ways of thinking. Pedro was chosen to go to Singapore because they want the brand of the Swiss quality to be implemented in Singapore. Their objective was not to adapt it. So they might be right, they might be wrong, but that's the thinking behind it. But absolutely, one would be much better as a communicator between two cultures and to be the go-between. Moreover, he's better in a startup situation. We'll look at that. Thank you for your answers.
Can I ask you to go back to the original slide? You said that you were in a position to potentially coach one or both of these. Did this happen? How did the coaching part enter into it with these leaders?
So if you can hold on to that question. I'm delighted you asked it, because in the next case we'll see just that.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. No, good. I like it.
Just curious.
So how can coaching help? Yes, how can coaching help? But this, here I'm looking for an argument, a business argument that you're going to talk to with the business. Okay? We'll look later how the coaching can help these two adapt in their situation. But what business argument can you say to the boss in question that it's really essential that, and it's in their best interest that coaching takes place? Can we have some answers or ideas?
I think you need to repeat that because I was it's not entirely clear.
Okay, so now you know that you can help these two people, but you have to convince the boss that they need coaching. What kind of arguments would you tell the boss that these expatriates need coaching? Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking for any hands raised.
I mean, I'll jump in and just say while we're seeing if people have a comment that it strikes me that you want to maximize their likelihood of success, right? So giving them some support and having a transitional anchor, getting back to your point about an anchor, I would think it would be a good case to have like a third party who's not in the mix for them to be able to speak to, share their concerns, because obviously they're going to exude self-confidence, but they may have some level of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And I'll add a few more. It's all of that, and here's a very down-to-earth way to say, when the person's is in a situation, I'll go back to that slide, here we go. They consume value by getting to know the business, okay? So they have to know the people, they have to know the business, they have to know the new environment, and then they're costing the company. And it takes a while before they start producing value to the company. Coaching can be this hash here. It's accelerate the process of being productive and being integrated and adapting. And their break-even point can become much faster. So this is a typical business, a factual, but that I found that a lot of businessmen respond to. Then you can go, this here, going to the next slide. What is the leader's biggest cause of derailment? We'll see here that it's the fit with the culture. This is another argument that the business drivers and industry experience are important, but the fit with the culture, and this is even exacerbated by being an expatriate, that you have not only the corporate culture to adapt to, but you also have the national culture to adapt to. So what coaching process might you use? There are many coaching processes. I'm just going to show you one, and it's here. To look into here, how are you going to manage the entry? That is before he goes abroad. What can they, the expectations, the self-awareness, the boss's expectations when he goes abroad, thinking about the life cycle of where the business is abroad, and what structure, what teams they need to have, what are the alliances they need to create, and what resources. So if they can do this before they go, like I did it with the Chinese that lived in Switzerland and that was going back to China, they prepare them mentally. And so at least that's one of the adaptations that can go faster. So let's look at the culture. What emotional and culture state is the expatriate going through? We talk about culture shock. What I want you to take away here is that after 6 months, after the euphoria of going abroad and having a new experience, there's a reality. And then also at the 2 years or less than 2 years, at the 18 months, but it's not necessarily 18 months, it could be within that margin, there's also a disillusionment. Also, when a leader goes and has full of ideas how to change and improve, there's usually, because I used to edit top global leaders' speech to his top 200 people every year and a half. It's called his plan for the next year and a half. And I can tell you, at times he was so frustrated because he had a vision of where it had to go, but the middle management took so long to get into the grid and to engage. So I just want this culture shock, which everyone knows. And then this one I think is much more interesting and more subtle, is this ethnocentrism of Milton Bennett's, where the reference is always one's culture experience as central to reality. Ethno-relativism is when one's culture is viewed in context of others. And I think the bilingual or trilingual and the monolingual that speaks another language, you translate to your mother tongue. I would say that's the ethnocentrism. You always refer back to what you know best. That is a strong cultural. And here, ethno-relativism is where there's different degrees. I can't go into it, but I just want to say that the global nomads are generally seen as integration of difference, where they adapt and they really think in different modes. So these are two elements for the cultural aspect. Okay, so now we'll go to the next case study.
Hey, Katrina, can I ask you a quick question? Sorry.
Yes, please do. Please
I'm just curious, is there a way that as a coach you would support your client to shift from the ethnocentric to the relative dimension? Like in a coaching dynamic, you may be trying to help them become more integrated so are there any techniques or anything that you've worked with as a coach to help them make that shift from ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism?
I'll give you an example of a concrete example. This is a Chinese person that lived most of his working life in Europe and Switzerland and was going back to China. Okay, so I found out, because I do research work in the company when I coach them, I found out that he was perceived as extremely smart and valuable, but he wasn't perceived as a top leader. And he said, his boss said, that in fact, you know, we're a company, we're a European company, and for us, we're used to having leaders be aggressive, interrupt, take position, like with a lot of testosterone, what I said. And this Chinese person, he never interrupted. He thinks it's rude. And so he sort of stayed back when he saw this behavior of interrupting people and everything. So after he was made aware of this, then the next we worked on was when he's in Europe to be more forthcoming, to be more assertive, more blunt. and then when he's back in China to adapt to that culture. And that he did very well, but it took a little practice, because when you think it's totally rude to do that, of course you have to work through that. So that's an example of going to accepting the difference and then adapting to the difference. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's a great example. I actually have had a client in the medical field that was the chief medical officer at a very prestigious hospital, and he was being prevented from moving to the next level in the organization because of his Korean cultural background, because he was also reticent to take up space. Culturally, he was more comfortable with letting other people speak, which actually was a strength. So I appreciate your example, because they wanted him to get coaching to become more aggressive and more assertive and to take up space. And he actually also thought that that was being rude. So it was difficult for him, but he did practice and learned more about the cultural context. So I think many of us may have seen that kind of in a variation in a number of different situations.
And another example is a South American who is very sophisticated, spoke several languages, and very good with multicultural environments. But he worked for a company that we all know the name of, but that is sort of Midwest, very cowboy and Indian, not cowboys, excuse me, and very forthcoming. And again, he was very appreciated. Everyone understood that he was very good with multicultural environments, but they felt a bit ill at ease with him because they never know where he was coming. They thought, some even thought he was shady because he wasn't as aggressive. So I'll continue because I see time is flying. So I want to get at least to the second case study, where Pedro becomes general manager of a subsidiary in Singapore, and Juan becomes a general manager of a startup company in the US. So what are the different mindsets? Okay, so here culture is not only national culture. Culture is also corporate culture. It could be a mindset and a value system where you change. So I would like to give you some examples here of different mindsets and values. Now, we could think, and we would need to explore as coaches, that Pedro has had a military background. And what is the assumptions of the military background? One, that you'll do anything for your country. Two, that following the rules is essential for the good functioning. What is the values of a general manager of a business? Is to make a profit, and to manage people, to give direction, to engage people by making them involved, to listen to them. Okay, so those are the different mindset. We would need as coaches to see what influence did Pedro have from the military experience. Did it affect his leadership? Did it affect his mindset? Is his expectation or assumptions that people follow his orders, and if they don't, they're usurping his authority? That's some kind of questioning, excuse me, that we would need to see. The next is, Pedro is also a functional expert for branding. Very, very, very good. His expertise is his power in the company, and it's made him grow hierarchically. But now he needs to be a general manager. That's a different skill set, and you'll have to accept to not be an expert in every area of branding now, because his primary goal is to to motivate people and to manage people. And another way of finding the culture of the company is to do research work. What is rewarded here? What is taboo in this company? Is management rewarded? Or is technical expertise? So these are kind of questions. How do you get fired? Of course, they'll say if you steal, but what else? These are kind of questions. You can get very rich information about the corporate culture. And then here, for both Pedro and Juan, that were functional managers, now they're general managers. I just give this because this is Ram Shahan also showed the different levels of what you need to keep and what you need to give away. I'm not going to go into it, but I encourage you to go and check this out. because it delineates the different competencies for each level and the different mindset, because if you're in the accounting, you have different mindset than if you're in the marketing. What is valued is different. What is rewarded is different. So these are the corporate cultures that we need to find out for both Juan and Pedro. Now, the other difference here is that we see here entering a startup, the life cycle of the company. Juan is going to do the startup, and Pedro is going to take a subsidiary that already exists for some time, but is in a difficult situation. So let's look at that. What is the life cycle of a company in? And this is, as a coach of global leaders, these are issues you need to discuss, to have them clarity, to find clarity in what it is. And if you have a system of doing it, it's very beneficial. So the startup of Juan, he needs to assemble the capabilities, he needs to get a strategy in place, he needs to structure, he needs to have a clear vision of where he wants to go. He has to start a structure and a system from scratch. He will probably do it because he's been in a situation where he has had to start from scratch. He'll also need to recruit high-performing team and make sure that the high-performing team works together. He'll also have to work with limited resources. He needs to energize people, but there's no rigidity because it's a startup. Okay, now, that's one. Pedro is in a situation of turnaround. Okay, so if the company doesn't do well, they'll go bankrupt. That subsidiary will. So he's got to convince employees that change is necessary. He's got to restructure the top team. He's got to refocus the organization. He's got to see if there's any strength in the company and revamp it. So that he has, because people recognize the difficulty, that the company's in the difficulty, he has credibility from the onset. Realignment is change, but I'm not going to go into it here, but it's slightly changing the company. There's also difficulties if a company is very successful and a leader comes in after, he might be in the shadow of the previous leader. But I would like to keep focused on our case study of Juan having a startup and Pedro having a turnaround company. And what is their communication strategy? So we see here that for Juan, he's in the beginning. He's spending money, right here, if you can see my mouse, he's spending money, but there's no revenue, but he has to have a clear picture where he wants to go and have milestones. Now, if you think that Pedro, who's going to Singapore, he's in a situation that is not drastic, then he'll need to communicate the changes as he sees it coming down. So a lot of communication, but people don't see it. His people don't see it. So that's a difficulty. If he really is in a turnaround situation, if the company's already gone down, so everyone knows that the company's gone down, so convincing the people to change will be less difficult, but he's got to do something radical. So it's where, is he really in a realignment or is he in a turnaround situation? And the communication strategy will be different because here he needs to do a lot of communication when the company is still successful, sort of, or at least perceived as such, even though he might see that it's going into disaster. Okay, so you need also the opportunities, weakness, strengths, and threats. Everyone knows this, the SWOT analysis, but this is something that in the process of the integration into a new position, to think about it. Here's another one that comes from Watkins, Michael Watkins, and to look what are the critical threats of the strategy, what are the promising opportunities, what are the organizational capabilities, weaknesses, strengths, what is the environment, external environment. And here he might have to learn a lot about Singapore, for example, Pedro. What is done, what is not done, how politically it's done, what are the threats. So this will take some time. So probably as a coach, this is where you're going to have to help him integrate and find the alliances in the new environment that could help him. The boss and the client's decision-making styles are also critical. I'm sure you've done this in your coaching, but let's have a look. How we're going to help coach Pedro. If Pedro has this profile, which is rational, dashboard, here it's exploratory, strategic, tactical, here it's extrovert, introvert, and here the dark green is organizational planning and being very concrete. So Pedro has this. So how are you going to coach him here? Well, I'm sure you have a lot of ideas, but we're having less time to finish, so I'm going to give you some ideas, brainstorm. Is that Pedro is going to have to consolidate a turnaround situation. He's probably the man, he has the preference because he's rational, he likes figures, he's organized, he'll plan things, it's concrete. Where he's going to have problems is where's the vision? He will avoid it, and yet he needs to have a vision to communicate where they're going to be. As we saw in the previous, if it's a turnaround situation, he's got to show that people know that it's not doing well. He'll put it into place, he'll consolidate, but he needs to have a vision. With Juan, he's way up strategy. He's living in the future as compared to Pedro that's living very much in the present. He will need, sorry about this, he will need to understand that maybe if he's coaching people that are not as visionary as him, that he has to set very specific milestones. If he sees 3 years ahead, he's got to very explicate what is the next step, what's the next 3 months, next 6 months. Also, he will probably naturally trend towards people that are a bit like him, and maybe in his leadership pay less attention to the Pedros in his company. So, or he will, on the contrary, spend a lot of attention to the Pedros of his company because he knows he's not good there. But if Pedro and Juan were to work together, they would have to sort of connect here on the rational and on the dashboards and the financial aspect. So these are things just to think about to help them integrate. What work does he like to do and what work does he does not like to, he likes to avoid? This is just, you know, it's a preference. It's not a competence in the previous, what we saw here. It's a preference. So we need to validate it by seeing, is in what he does here, is it confirmed that he only goes to what he likes to do and he has blind spots on what he doesn't like? Both profiles are very typified, so there might be blind spots. It's okay, he's a leader, he probably has other people to do things he doesn't like, but he needs to be aware of it and to be sure that that's taken care of. So what's the coaching? We need to validate what is he doing about these different things. Having a framework like this helps to determine where he might be not paying enough attention. The technical would be the strategies, market, technologies, processes, definitely are probably Pedro's preference. The political would be the power, the politics, and in the organization. That we would have to determine. You do need to have your alliances to be able to move forward. And the cultural elements would be the values, the norms, the guiding assumptions. So it's just a checkpoint to see if there's any blind spots. This you all know probably is another way. It's leadership that gets resolved from Daniel Goleman. Here again, what is his preferred leadership style? Maybe does Pedro that has a military background, is he the coercive style? Do as I say? If that's the case, it might be appropriate in Singapore for a turnaround situation, but it certainly wouldn't be for any other situation if that were the case. He would have to learn to engage people, to get them involved. So here again, I'm going very, very quickly. There's one more slide, and then I'll open it up to questions. Here is the flow theory from Csikszentmihalyi. This is very helpful to understand in what stress situation is your global leader. He's in a promotion, of course. He probably is in a more challenging situation than his competence. So he's got to have to learn. And that's something to be discussed as a coach. Here, if he's in flow, it's more challenging than his competence. We saw that Juan was bored at headquarters. We could find out why he's bored. Maybe his competence compared to the challenge was too little, and that's why he was bored. And however, in this new situation, they might be excited or anxious, okay? Like Pedro's profile doesn't like risk too much, so he might get anxious. And if that's the case, the coaching would be, what can he put into place to have the support that he comes back to being in the flow where he's most productive? Because as soon as he's anxious, he's probably less productive. So this is a system that helps the coach determine where his coachee is and what needs to be put into place. Of course, if he's bored, he needs more challenges. So I thought this would be a good system to determine it. So again, what we went through was the cultural elements of this model. There's also some self-awareness before they leave and also some knowledge building as we did in the promotion. So now I would like to open it up before we do the next case study, if we have time, which I don't think so. But what ways would you, what other ways would you coach these two individuals? Can we open it up to questions and answers and comments?
Yes, Stephanie can tell us whether someone's raising their hand.
Yes, we still don't have any hands raised, but Jeff, I know I've been sending you in a couple of questions and comments not related to the one Katrina just asked, but maybe that's a good starting point and see if we can see if we get anyone who wants to live.
Folks, if you want to raise your hand and share your thoughts or questions directly with Katrina, please do. In the meantime, Katrina, there is a couple of folks that I think are very interested in the slides that you shared around decision making. Wondering if there's actually a assessment that you use for some of these issues like decision making styles, or do you just use the framework and ask questions?
So usually I have them do the questionnaire. A Myers-Briggs type indicator is also a possibility. There's a lot of different ones. This one I like because it's pretty sophisticated and it goes into very many details. There's the Herman test as well. So they have the questionnaire, and then we discuss their preferences and how it has made, let's discuss their preferences. What are the things that they're most likely to forget under stress? What stresses them? I then have them look at theirs. I go to the self-awareness, and then I have them sort of, once they get the instrument and knowledge of it, they draw out their boss's profile, because this awareness helps them determine their boss's decision-making profile, and then how to talk to him. But I've also had it used that after an inventory like this, I have them draw each one of their team members, so they understand if they live very much in the present, if they're better consolidators, if they're visionaries, if they're untimely, and all the consequences of being a strong preference one way or the other. So it helps them think of the different people they need to communicate with, how to adapt their leadership style to better be understood.
Is there a particular tool, though? What is the name of the tool? People are asking if they can follow up.
It's called PREDOM. A preference, préférence in French, PREDOM, and homme is man, preference of the man.
Is there a way for folks to get access to that?
Sure, you can contact me and I'll put them in contact.
Okay, great. So those folks that are asking, just follow up with Katrina and she can put you in contact with them.
Yes. Yes.
We also have a question that I've been sitting thinking, so I'm glad that Kelsey is raising it, which is any distinctions when you coach a global female nomadic leader?
Yes. 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 What I found is that the global leaders, in the conversation, it's much more, the personal and the professional is much more interlinked in our conversation. And with men, of course I'm exaggerating, but I just want to make a point. With men, it's more professional unless they have traumatism or they're divorced or their girlfriend left them or their boyfriend left them, the girlfriend left them, or the boyfriend, in fact. Then the personal comes into the conversation. But I think with women, it's really an integral part of the coaching. I've noticed that difference.
Are you finding that there are more and more female nomadic leaders, or is it still a heavily male constituency?
Well, there's women leaders for sure, but often they have a trailing husband, and sometimes they've given up their personal life for it. Let's say family life, not personal life, their family life. So I don't think it's quite equal yet, but it's definitely improved in the last 20 years for sure.
Right.
We do have a live question, and I will open the microphone to Mary Vargas. Mary?
Hi. I was really intrigued about the discussion you were just having about self-awareness, because, and I wondered about the tool that you used, because I use a similar tool as well. I'm here in San Francisco, and I find that a lot of the baseline for being able to do other parts of the coaching that you've mentioned is really developing that self-awareness so they understand the impact that they bring, that they, as a leader to the organization, whether it's their current team or a new team, and figuring out how to look for the preferences, just like you were talking about, what are the other skills that they can recognize in the people that they're leading so that they can fill their gaps. And I use a tool called LIFO, which is short for life orientations. But I think it's really important that I find that I feel like the self-awareness aspect is one of the biggest parts of coaching.
Yes, and absolutely, and giving clarity about themselves, clarity about their vision, their business, clarity about how they're going to interact. And I think also this self-awareness helps them be more agile as a leader, because they know their preference, and then they know they're better aware of somebody else's preference, and so they can adapt their leadership towards the context and the person they're talking to. So it starts with self-awareness. But I'm not saying anything original. Daniel Goldman said that.
Right.
Right.
But what I'm also always I continue to believe that, because what I see is a great lack of self-awareness often, not a lack of desire, but and once it's pointed out, possible blind spots. Or like I was with a team last week in Houston, and they were actually the most aligned team of executives I had ever been with, and they had, every single one of them had a strong preference in a particular area. They also had a secondary preference, which was close. They were all engineers, but they were all very concerned with fairness and excellence, every single one of them. And it was really interesting to hear their conversation as a team with that result.
Yes, because often you hire similar people, especially in the leadership team. But no, and it's very good for the individual as the team. This instrument I had just shown you, it's very good also for teams and to find out what their Achilles heel is and what their strengths are. And also I use it to say, okay, now you're going to talk to this preference. How would you talk to them? And you would talk now to the rational people. What kind of language would you have? So also practicing, you can literally practice, have them practice.
Yeah, I do the same thing, and I find it extremely beneficial.
Yes, I agree with you
That's
totally.
wonderful.
Totally.
Thank you.
Great.
Well, thank you for your input. I just want to say a cultural thing about coaching as well. What I've found is that when I coach English people, they're so, well, it's not a generalization, but I've, in certain cases, found that when I coach my English clients, they're very proud to be coached. So it's like they have a big office, they have a Jaguar, and they have their coach. So it disseminates in the company. Now, I've coached top executives, in women as well, in France, and they sort of hush-hush that they have a coach. Also maybe because they're women because they don't want to show that they have a weakness, and it has a remedial connotation, even though she's top leader. So I think it's also important for coaches to see how coaching is perceived in the company. I'm sure you do so, but in different cultures and different genders, they have different perceptions if it's remedial or it's a perk.
And that kind of thing is changing rapidly depending upon the location and the culture and from where it was 10 years ago.
It's changing, and it's good to know, to ask, because you know, if you're going to work in that environment, it's worth it. I don't know, Jeff, if we have time for another case, but otherwise I'll keep taking questions.
Do you want to just do a quick summary of your case? Because I think it's interesting. You have about 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Could you do a quick summary?
Yeah, could I show some slides because it'll be easier to follow?
Sure, of course. Just keep in mind that we, you know, if you can summarize it, so then we have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. I think people find it interesting.
Okay, so here is another case. This is one. Now, he was in the U.S., remember? He spent 3 years there. His father had a car accident and died. His family asked him to take over the family company and help out. He has 3 sisters and is working in the company. He feels unprepared, apprehensive of taking over the company, but his family wants him to do it. They ask for his help. Now, how come this is a major transition? How could you prepare him? So I'm not going to ask you, unfortunately, but I'll give you some tweaks, some approaches. You know Kubler-Ross? Check that out, because Kubler-Ross does exactly that. Now, his father died, and we saw that for a global nomadic leader, anchors are essential, okay? Was his father his anchor? I'm sure he was very attached to him, but was it somebody fundamental in his balance? And so Kubler-Ross, we do this model is used very much into companies, but basically, she's Swiss, by the way, she did her research on people that were dying and the people around them, how they accept the person that was passing away. So there's a denial, there's a resistance, then there's exploration where you accept the situation, but you're still very affected, and then you start looking forward and engaging. So check that out. In Juan's case, his father died. He's not going to do much or be that productive before you address his mourning, okay? And then what does research say about family-owned business? Only 30% survive in the second generation, 12%, third generation, 3% in the fourth generation. That's very little. So there is definitely where coaches can make a significant difference in helping families transition from one generation to the other. And here I'll give you what you take away is from this slide is that most problems come from a lack of communication and trust, preparation too, but certainly lack of communication. So the coaching, where does it take place? Communication between family members, developing trust. But you need to know that family-owned businesses tend to outperform publicly owned businesses. Okay, why? They have a bigger retention of their leaders. They're quicker to react to the market. They invest in employee loyalty. They reinvest long-term perspectives because they don't have quarterly results to give to the market. So they have long-term. And I think Nestle is one of the companies, even though they have quarterly, they have, at least Peter Brabeck has a more long-term perspective. Also governance by the people with an emotional and financial investment. So it holds the company together. They have a purpose. Here, to summarize, you need to help them communicate and develop trust, create a governance structure, and align family values with business. What is the family values? Harmony, personal development, keeping the family together, working, collaborating. What is the business values? Making money. Very different. They don't necessarily go together. So that is a focal point in the communication for the coaches to help these two values work together. So I summarized it there. I'll try to summarize, or I'll stop here. Jeff, you keep telling me if I have time about repatriation. Maybe I'll give you a slide or two just to summarize.
Sure.
So Pedro comes back to Mexico. He's with his family, 6 years in Singapore. So remember, he was a potential CEO at Zillow. So how can you prepare Pedro to transition back home? What are the risk rewards? Well, one of the rewards is he had international experience, he has management experience. The risk is that he has maybe not managed country managers. So to be CEO of a multinational is a huge step. Plus, he's not a visionary. He avoids it. So that needs to be really worked on or addressed as a coach of this Pedro. So what research says about repatriates, which is often ignored, is that 30 or 40% of expatriates leave within 2 years of repatriation compared to people that don't expatriate. So what is the conversation for the coaches? What is his long-term plan? What can he do with experience in the company? And it's critical to prepare what is this position that Pedro is going to have when he comes back. If he's considered CEO, potential CEO, he will know before he comes back. So there'll be less anxiety, there'll be less hesitation, and he has a long-term career. But many of these repatriates don't know. So that causes uncertainty. Let's look. So this is the reverse culture shock. But this is what they feel. Not recognized from their experience often, which makes them leave the company after 2 years or within 2 years. They feel frustrated because in Singapore, Pedro had a lot more independence. Now he's in headquarters, less independence. I talked to the prior HR of United Nations. He said, I recommend that my leaders go to the field to develop their leadership. I said, why? Because in the field, when they're responsible for a group of people and they don't make sure that they have water, safety, or food, they know the immediate consequences of the decision. They're decision makers. At headquarters, there's 10 people that have to be involved in a decision. Therefore, their leadership is not as much strengthened, and they don't see the consequences of their decisions. So I thought that was interesting. They could be annoyed, they have less help, stressed by the changes at headquarters that they were unaware of. Often you come back to the home country thinking that everything will be the same. They need to build new alliances, and that's where the coach can help. Who are the people they need to talk to? What's the official organogram? But what's more important, what is the unofficial decision-making process? And you need to find that out. By doing research work within the company, you can find that out. They can feel isolated because of colleagues' lack of interest in their prior experience or surprised by the jealousy. So I think I'll stop here And that's quick summarize and be open for questions.
That was great, Katrina. Thank you. I'm sorry you had to rush through those. Those are fascinating cases, and I think we'd love to have 2 hours to talk through repatriation examples and family. And but I think that, so anyone that has a last-minute question, please send it through.
Yes, and if they have more questions afterwards, they can contact me at Katrina Burrus at LinkedIn or on my email. That's MK Burrus, my last name, B-U-R-R-U-S, @gmail.com. I have another email, but that one I'll answer your questions. Love to answer your questions or even share. You know, I love to talk to colleagues and have a platform of discussion.
That's great. Also, as Stephanie mentioned, this recording will be available on the Institute of Coaching website. People would potentially like to get copies of your slides, Katrina. Are you open to that?
I'll give a few slides, not all of them, but I will give a few slides.
Okay, so what's the best way for them to, so they email you?
Yes, I think that's great. Have them email me, and I'll be happy to share.
That's great. I mean, I think for me, just listening to you and thinking about the folks that I work with and the complexities of the multicultural environment and the global traveling, and as you said, the issues around anchors. It's very interesting just to hear you speak about the emotional depth that's involved. You know, there's so much stress, and I really appreciate your talking about how coaches, positioning yourself as a coach to help someone, you know, increase the likelihood of them being successful, because these are very difficult migrations, you know, moving from multiple countries, as you know, going through personal life change, whether it's loss, all of these things. I was sitting here wondering how many of them have therapists.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of them prefer coaches because it doesn't have that connotation that something's wrong with them psychologically.
Right.
Yeah. So,
so leave us with last minute. We're going to wrap here, and thank you. But any last thoughts you want to share?
Yes, I think really coaching global leaders in transitions are essential for companies, and they're essential for the leaders' success, because it can be quite traumatizing not to succeed there. It could be limiting their career, and I think coaching has a real strong place to help these transitions for global leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think, I don't know, I can't speak for anyone other than my own experience, but I'm finding more and more the option of being global and moving potentially from one country to another, as the European market has become more flexible, and Asia is coming, rising like crazy with growth in Singapore and China and other places, that more and more often my clients are being asked to either work in various different countries or have team people in different countries. So I think that more as coaches we can become well versed in some of the issues that you raised and have some tools and instruments to support us as we support our clients. The better off we'll be as coaches, because we're certainly living in a global world.
Yes, and Jeff, there are people that are from other countries that will be maybe they'll come to the States and will be the bosses of your clients. You know, if a Russian is the boss of your client, it's good to know what is his values, his way of working.
Right.
So it's not only going abroad, it's also with multinational companies, especially Switzerland that has multinational companies all over the place. But thank you so very much, Jeff. It was great.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time all the way from Switzerland to be with us, and I hope that everyone you know, got a taste of what Katrina's expertise can offer, and will feel free to be in touch with her, and maybe you'll end up on her radio show or her TV show. So
yes,
thank
that would
you
be
all.
wonderful.
Thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next month when we have Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School talking about teams. So see you soon, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.